Yeah, I mean, I was always a serial entrepreneur. I had my first business when I was uh, 11 with the penny saver delivering papers. And my first employee was my older brother, who I'd hire to do the inserts into the penny saver. And then we'd go around and deliver them all. Um, I had businesses all throughout high school. We partnered with St. John's Ambulance and sold first aid kits door to door, with a portion of the profits going back to St. John's Ambulance. I loved selling. I worked at Athletes World, which is like Foot Locker, but has since gone out of business. It was a shoe store, athletic shoes, and they paid commission. And I was, 16 years old and making $12 an hour at the time, which felt like a fortune of money. And so I really was a student of trying to learn why people exchanged money for goods. I found human behavior fascinating, and was always trying new things and new techniques to get better at what I was doing. Um, I went off to McGill University. When I graduated, while most of my friends were getting jobs, either on the marketing side with big companies like Procter Gamble, or on the finance side with companies in New York or Toronto, like Lehman Brothers at the time, which has since gone belly up, or Goldman Sachs. That just wasn't for me. I really was passionate about entrepreneurship and about this. I think what I loved about it was this idea of creating something from nothing, and the power of that, and just the brilliance of it, and how it can bring people together and create connections and take on a life of its own. So I started my own business right out of university. I had, because I had worked in retail, both selling shoes, and then later on I sold clothing as well. Uh, I realized that when people bought clothing in stores, they did it in two stages. They first evaluated whether they liked the item on the rack. So they were evaluating the look of the item, and then they would evaluate the fit of the item on their body afterwards. But when you went to at the head office level, when you evaluated for these companies that had many stores, they'd get the sales data, and they'd look at that sales data, and they decide whether something is selling or not. And then usually the conversations that would take place is why something is selling or why it's not, which would guide you as you develop more product, right? So I created a system where we could capture what people were trying on at the fitting room, and I had an algorithm to compare it to the POS, the point of sale, the sales data, so I could match up a transaction from the fitting room with the corresponding transaction at the cash. And so we would give clothing retailers this conversion rate at the fitting room. So now I give more insight into why something was or wasn't selling. So we could split this process into two stages. So for example, an item could have been tried on a lot, but have a low conversion rate at the fitting room, which would indicate that you got the look right, but you got the fit was off. Or it could be vice versa. It doesn't get tried on often, but when it does, it converts really high. So I was a very ambitious guy, and I wrote all these handwritten letters to all the CEOs of every single big clothing retailer you can think of. Whether it's Les Wexner from Limited Brands, which owns Victoria's Secret, or whether it's the Gap or Macy's, all these big companies. And I was really good at getting these meetings. I managed to, I pitched it to every single company you can think of. And I got in, and I talked to one executive. They say, this is interesting. Let's talk to another executive. This is interesting. Let's get more people involved. And I kept hearing this word. I kept hearing this word, interesting. And, interesting is a great word in a classroom, but it's a terrible word in business. Interesting kept me going for a while, but I wasn't getting, when can you deliver, which is something you really want to hear in business. So anyway, long story short, I eventually got a pilot at Macy's on 34th and 7th in New York City, which is one of the most famous retail stores in the world. But it didn't work in the end. And the reason it didn't work was that it was a nice to have, not a must have. It was a bit too, people in those days were just starting to perfect their point of sale technology, their their cash register technology. They didn't even have proper reporting coming out of a lot of people weren't advanced in their infrastructure. The idea of using technology in retail was really in its infancy. This is 2005. And I just think the idea required people to be able to look at information and do something with it. So it wasn't as compelling a technology as, say, an airport kiosk that allows you to check in, right? When I see an airport kiosk, I can give you a very, very easy return on investment formula. I can say to you, you put this in, you get to use 20% less people, less labor. So this didn't have that. This had you're going to get information that's going to help you be a better retailer and get ahead of your competition. So anyway, after this pilot, 3 years of spending all my energy and time and blood, sweat, and tears developing this fitting room concept that I called Fitting Room Central, I had to admit that it wasn't working, and I had to move on. And so I left that company that I created, and we had 3 or 4 employees and investors, and had one of whom was my parents, because I was fresh out of school, and I had to admit that it didn't work. And I moved on. I needed a job at this point. My girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, looked at me very clearly and said, "It's nice that you want to be an entrepreneur, but you need a job." I was making no money. And so I got a job with a cousin of mine. He's my dad's first cousin, who I didn't really know growing up, because I grew up in Ottawa, and he's in Montreal. And he happens to be the founder of Le Chateau. He's 50 years my senior. So he's turning 90. But at the time he was in his mid 70s, and he was coming out of Le Chateau at that time and looking to make investments in small companies. So I effectively was in private equity. He said, "Look, I'll hire you to go and look at small businesses for us to consider investing in." So I said, "Great." And he paid me, I think, $35,000 at the time. And I bought a book. I bought a book on what Warren Buffett looks for in investments, figuring that you got to fake it a little bit until you make it. And I was reading this book, and I was looking at different investments and all kinds of different companies. And I remember that I was going to a movie in Montreal at the International Movie Theater, which is kind of off the beaten path. It's off of one of the main streets in Montreal. And we were early to the movie. And so across the street was this small tea house, very Asian inspired tea house. And that's what tea houses were in those days. They were either very British or very Asian, and you felt like you had to know something in order to go in them. And often you had to whisper, because it was this sort of sacred environment with a lot of protocols. And sure enough, I walked in this tea house, and they had this great table service where they were explaining tea and showing us all these different things about tea. And I kind of really fell in love with it, both as a product. I found it interesting, and I got excited about it. And I realized nobody was doing it on a fun way on the main streets of the country. It was always in these sort of back alley streets, and nobody was doing it in a North American way, and making it fun and vibrant and energetic. And that, and combined with this book I was reading about what makes a great investment, according to someone like Warren Buffett, it also fit a lot of criteria that there's a big difference between a good idea and a good business. And I think that my first business with Fitting Room Central was a great idea, but not a great business. But what was interesting about tea is not only did I feel it was a great idea, but it has great economics. The margins are very good. There's no size, no color. So the complexity of the business is much less than, say, a clothing business or a shoe business. You can operate at a very small spaces. It's not like TV sets. So your productivity per square foot of real estate is quite attractive. It ships well for e-commerce, which was very much in its infancy. This is 2007, 2006 even. And it's not like a turkey sandwich. It doesn't go bad. The shelf life is very good. So I kind of looked at these factors and I was like, wow, this is really a Warren Buffett business. And I got excited about it. I walked into work the next day. I'm like, tea, we should do tea. And yeah, I mean, we looked for a tea company to invest in because remember, at this time, I'm supposed to be looking at private equity. And finally, I turned to my cousin and said, look, I'll do it. You back me. And he put up all the money. I was 25%, he was 75%, and away we went. And it was a great combination of youth and experience. It got very complicated later on, which I'll get into throughout the conversation, I'm sure. But with a heavy heart, I decided to leave the company after 9 years in 2016. And I moved on, and I actually ended up moving back to Ottawa, which is where I'm from, after having lived in Boston, because we did a deal with a private equity group with DAVIDsTEA, and I moved to Boston for a period of time when we were going into the US. And then I moved back to Ottawa, and I've since started Mad Radish, which is all about gourmet fast food. And we also have two other brands that we're now operating out of our Mad Radish stores. We created Louisa's Burritos and Bowls during the pandemic, and we also created Revival Pizza. Louisa's Burritos and Bowls is authentic South American ingredients. Revival Pizza is high quality Neapolitan style pizza. And all three of these brands, Mad Radish, which is all about healthy bowls that are also filling and have big international flavors. All three of these brands, Mad Radish, Louisa's, and Revival, really share this common goal about being all about gourmet fast foods. And the idea of why combine them is that it facilitates delivery a lot easier. With more of the business moving to delivery, you have to look to there's a cost to delivery, so you have to look to offset that cost by generating more out of your existing real estate. And it also makes it so that if you're in a family, one person can have Mad Radish, another person can have an amazing burrito from Louisa's, and other people can have pizza from Revival in one order. So that's my new business, and that's what I'm working on now. Yeah, and I'm always looking to make investments in businesses, and I just love entrepreneurship, and it's what I do with most of my time when I'm not with my family.